Hello and welcome back to another episode of Strong Collectors Comics. My name is Jordan, and I'm joined today, as ever, by my plucky co-host, Sidekick Dakota. And if you've never read a comic before, you're in luck. But even if you have, you're also in luck, because we're going to be breaking down what we think of as our top 5 each, 10 total, starter comics, getting you into the world. Really comics at their best, I think, when comics are really working, all the cool elements that go into them. And the big reason for why we love comic books. So I'm going to jump right into my top recommendation. I always did this in high school when people were getting into Marvel. It was Civil War. And I know there's some split opinions with people on Civil War as a comic. I found, Dakota. I don't know if you've gotten in on those discussions.
I haven't.
Yeah, some people, it's like trying to be too edgy or, whatever. Mark Miller, I think people kind of gave him a lot of hate, but I've always liked a lot of his stuff. But I think it's a good one. It showcases most significant Marvel characters when you think of Marvel. I think it's cool to pit the heroes against each other. I think Marvel has always done that well, where you have your heroes in conflict. I think it's a cool story, self-contained. The art, quite good, Steve McNiven. So even if you're not have developed a comic art palette, because I think weird art can put people off to getting into comics. Not weird, but you know what I mean. It's like it just looks nice. It's pretty standard, but it looks good. So even if you've seen Civil War the movie, definitely worth checking out because I think it's different enough and a pretty compelling Marvel story. So shifting gears to another compelling one, I recently recommended a friend of mine, Dakota, to read Black Hammer, and it was one of his first comics. I think I'd had this on my, was this top 5 or hidden gems? I don't remember.
I think it was your hidden gem.
Okay. Black Hammer, I think, is a great book. Most people by now are familiar with like comic tropes, at least peripherally from movies. I feel like Black Hammer does a great job of presenting like what you know about comics with a little bit of a twist. What I think it does really well is the cliffhangers. I think a great comic, a mark of a great comic to me is you get to the end of an issue and you're like, I got to read the next one. Like what's happening next? I think you'd said this about Black Hammer during your read through of it.
Yeah.
Just kind of a page turner. So I think even if you're not big into comics, the art might be a little different. So that could be difficult for some to access maybe. But I think it's a solid story. And again, pretty self-contained, only about 4 volumes. So check that out if you haven't. My third, we're going to shift over to the DC world. And I struggle with picking a best Batman book to start with, but I landed on Batman Year One. I think this one, again, it's a good jumping on point for Batman early in his career, but it kind of has that grounded, gritty feel, but you're getting him starting out. Some really cool moments. Again, only 4 issues, but I think it packs a lot into 4 issues and really characterizes a lot of, at least like the Christopher Nolan era of Batman, which I think a lot of people were fans of that style of Batman. But I think it still holds up after however long it's been since that one came out. So I'm going to put that one on there. I'm also going to go with Marvels, just the Marvel book. This is where you have Alex Ross art. I know you're a fan of, Dakota. Big fan. And this one is about a photographer sort of seeing the significant events of the early Marvel comics, like in that time. So he goes through like the 40s, 50s, 60s, that kind of thing. But I think it's a cool opportunity where it follows like a civilian perspective, but still manages to make a pretty interesting story and kind of puts a new twist on what you would think of as the Marvel Universe. So I've always enjoyed that one a lot. And then I'm going to put another Jeff Lemire comic. I realize I've got 2 of these on here, so you can read that however you will. But I'm going to say Sweet Tooth. And I think, again, I wanted to put this one on because I realize all the other ones are superhero centric. So I was trying to think of a good non-superhero book that is still really compelling and not super, super long. I don't know. Sweet Tooth is 40 issues. So take that to mean what you will. But I think it reads pretty quick and you get sucked into it. So again, not superhero, but just as interesting, if not more than a lot of superhero stories that I've read.
Yeah, those are really good ones. I think Like I like the inclusion of the Marvels because it's like, I think when I was first kind of compiling my list, I was like, Kingdom Come is a really popular DC book, but I feel like it's kind of like you want to be into comics a little bit more to
Mm-hmm.
get
To
it
appreciate
more.
it. Yeah.
Right. Where Marvel's is, it kind of takes that similar, like you said, like a civilian look at superheroes that is similar to Kingdom Come, but I think it makes it a little bit more of like a jumping off point.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So my 5, you had one Batman story. I've got 2. So the number 1 book I always tell people they should read, and it's probably heavily biased by me, is Long
Mm-hmm.
Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one. That's just self-contained. You could just read it and not read any more. But if you liked it, you could read kind of the follow-ups, and we're even getting new follow-ups coming soon. So
Mm-hmm.
the art it might take a little bit to get into for some folks. It might not be what you're expecting for Batman.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, then my second recommendation would be Batman Hush.
Mm.
And that one's fun because it pulls in like pretty much every major Batman villain. And you've got still sort of that mystery that you would have in Long Halloween. But you're getting to see kind of everybody. And if you're new to comics, then you can kind of see which characters, this like Poison Ivy person, I want to read more
Mm-hmm.
about that, or Killer Croc. And then you can go find those jumping off points after the
Yeah.
story.
I was gonna put Hush, I think, on mine, but I think I had felt like it was gonna be on yours, Dakota. So
Yeah.
I've always said Hush. That was my, that because I once loaned it out and then
Mhm.
it never returned. Luckily, I've since gotten a new copy. But yeah, I think that's a great primer, not just to comics, but specifically to Batman, but comics in general, because it does something really cool where it has a consistent story, and like you said, it incorporates most every major Batman like convention and
Mhm.
side characters and villains, and it works,
Right.
which is almost same thing for Long Halloween though.
Yeah.
So
They're very
I,
similar.
it gives you a good sampler. I mean, Jeff Loeb, what a man! Two of the goats of Batman story. That is pretty amazing. He wrote both those, so
Yeah.
we give him a pass for Ultimates 3 because he came up with those. So
True. All right,
great picks.
we're going to stick with DC for one more, and this is going to be Blackest Night. This one's kind of fun because it pulls in like zombie elements too. I think a lot of people have maybe like they've watched Walking Dead or whatever. Like everybody knows zombies. So when you kind of have those like superhero zombies, maybe you don't know the characters of like this character died and now is being resurrected, but you don't really have to understand that to know
Mm-hmm.
what's going on and like which zombie is like emotionally challenging for somebody to see come back to life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that story does a good job. There's some other tie-ins that you could read if you wanted more backstory into like specific characters with it. But if you just read Blackest Night proper, I think that's enough. Now switching over to Marvel, I think one of my this is my all-time favorite X-Men story, and that's Astonishing X-Men. This one's going to be, I think it's 3 volumes, maybe 4.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit longer than some of the other recommendations, but this one, if you're wanting like cliffhangers, when I was reading through this one recently, I would get to the end of the issue and I was like, I
Mm-hmm.
can't stop here. Like I would have to stop reading halfway through issues just because they did such a good job of setting up the next one. And you're like, I got to read at least the next page,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to keep going. So,
Yeah.
um, fantastic X-Men story. And
Yeah.
it's got a lot of those classics, like it's got Wolverine and Cyclops,
Mm-hmm.
but then you're also kind of getting some other characters that maybe aren't quite as popular, but still like very big in X-Men stories.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best, I think, like standalone X-Men modern stories that I think is
Mhm.
definitely up there as a classic, I would say. Just using those characters and making a new story. And like you said, it's continues to keep you hooked like the whole time through.
Right. And it's kind of challenging because like, I don't know, I personally don't love reading older comics, so it's hard for me to recommend those to folks too, because I feel like as those are historically important,
Mm-hmm.
but if I'm trying to get this person like hooked on
Right.
reading, I'm probably going to go a little bit more modern.
Yeah.
Um,
That's kind of
versus
what
classics.
I made my list in mind as well. Like if I met some, because
Right.
I think the more you read, like you can then go back and you appreciate the older
Yeah.
stuff more. But I think to start with
Hmm.
that, I agree. It's even if it's really well written, it's you always run the risk of person going to be like, oh, this is kind of old.
It's a little dry, a little
Right.
old. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And my last recommendation is going to be Planet Hulk. I think, people know Hulk, but then getting to know him in this environment, it's the first time you meet most of those characters anyway. So like you don't have to have a backstory
Mhm.
on the
Yeah.
like planet Scar to know the characters because you're going to meet them there.
Mhm.
And then if you really like that, it just flows super well into Planet Hulk. And then
Mhm.
you've got them hooked because then they're going to
World
read
War
the
Hulk.
next and then it's going to World War Hulk. That's what
Right.
I meant.
And then
Um,
you can go read the Ed McGuinness, Jeff Loeb, Red Hulk, and then you
right.
can talk to Dakota about how much he loves it.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I think those are all like, I think kind of all of these, there's nothing that's necessarily like when you read this, it's like over. It's going to be
Mhm.
things that can like hook folks into like, oh, I liked that story. Like what happens
Mhm.
next? But they also could say like, that was a good story and I'm done. And they don't really have to know what's next. Like it's a
Mhm.
self-contained.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Planet Hulk is great. And I think a good example with that, it's like, yeah, it works without you knowing all the backstory of who's the Hulk and what's he come from. It's like this
Mhm.
is just a compelling story and a world and a whole new light for Hulk. So, yeah, I agree, man. I think Planet Hulk would be a consideration for mine. So that is what we've got for our top 10 recs for new readers to comics. Let us know below if you've checked any of these out, what your recommendations are. If you have friends that are getting into comics, because there's a chance maybe we haven't read them and we'd like to check them out. So please leave those below and be liking, sharing, and subscribing. And until next time, as always, stay strong.